but there is only, it's log linear in this case, so because that looks nicer, and most politicians like to see that because you can have, if you have an increasing income, the increase in use of materials bends a little bit, so it does not rush into the sky. But this is for all mathematically educated people still equivalent.
Don't worry, just for the time.
Okay? Nothing wrong I said, yeah? Fine. Okay, so there was the second driver, income. First driver was population. This has an elasticity that's about 0.6 or so. It's not so high. Yeah, and if we look at this in more detail, there is very much structural change in this last century. If we look at the period between 1900 and the Second World War, which is the blue bars, and I show you the materials, I show you the money, the income, and here I show you the population. In this first phase up to the Second World War, we have an increase in income, but we have very little increase in material use and also not much increase in population. Then the next phase, sort of the so-called reconstruction phase after the Second World War, the yellow bar, that's a huge growth, but unequal between the three. And the next phase again is after 73. There we have a massive decrease in use of materials. We have a massive decrease in use of population, but we still have a strong increase in income. So this is the last 30 years, if you will. Well, and finally, we have a new period with massive growth of materials since 2000. And this is a global process. I'll show you later a bit more in detail. We also find that we have a shift in the source of our resources. So while still half of the resources we use are now, say, everything, yeah? Biomass, construction materials, metals, all together, half of this is generated in industrial countries still. But what you see here is a gradual shift towards the developing countries. And this shift will become stronger. So increasingly, industrial countries show up as high consumers of resources, but not as source countries, not as strong source countries of resources. Makes a big difference for the political development. My last variable was population density. Here you see the global data. You see that resource consumption is, if I take the next one, these are industrial countries, this is the rest of the world. So industrial countries consume twice as many resources per capita than the rest of the world. But there is this difference between high density and low density. Good news, because we are in a world of rapid urbanization. We are in a world of rapid increasing population density. And quite apparently, we are able to provide people with the same material comfort for a lower resource price under high density conditions. This is what it says, both in developing and in industrial countries. So cities that are usually the origin of all bads are really a very, very strong opportunity to have a good life with a lower environmental consumption. Yeah. Okay, so now finally what UNEP did and now will publish on Monday is a projection of resource use up to the year 2050. They call it 3 forced future scenarios. It starts off with this little snaky curve that you have seen already, that's per capita resource use of materials up to the year 2000. What you see here, this little black tail reaching into the sky, that's the new development since 2000. This is due to developing countries, not to Europe. Europe continues like this. So 3 scenarios. One scenario is the red one. The red scenario says, let's freeze the level of resource consumption of industrialized countries and allow the rest of the world by the year 2050 to catch up with these levels. And they are on their way to do so. This is not a new trend. Yeah, this is happening. What this means is that our annual resource extraction will be 3 times as high as today. This is a business as usual scenario, but it is an impossible business as usual scenario. This is by all means not possible on this planet. It is not possible in terms of biomass, if we look at what FAO says. It is absolutely not possible in terms of climate policy. Even the most wild scenarios of climate policy won't go there. And we don't have this amount of metals. The International Resource Panel has produced a report on metals that looks very worrying, for example. And Australia has recently produced a government report saying peak everything, analyzing its mines. So yeah, that's where we are. So this business as usual is no business as usual, not a realistic business as usual. The blue line implies that the industrialized countries halve their metabolic rates by the year 2050. So they use half as much energy carriers and materials per capita by the year 2050 than they do now. This is not as wild as you may think, because this implies about a 2% productivity increase per year. That would get us there. And then all other countries catch up with this. This would more or less maintain our per capita resource extraction. And the green one is a radical one, that we say, what happens if we say we can't extract annually more resources than we do now into the future? And then the per capita, because we have a population growth, the per capita amounts have to decrease. So you can see that now in terms of scale. So this is per capita, this is totals, and you see what it looks like. And so we have, UNEP didn't manage to generate a scenario with decreasing resource extraction. That would have been so implausible, it's not there. And still they were quite shocked by what they saw here. But these are, well, very simply done, but solid scenarios. I won't explain them in detail. You can have a look at your files. So, but is that a threat? Is that a threat to our well-being? Is that a threat to our future? Is that a doomsday kind of argument? And there I show you an analysis by Julia Steinberg and Timmins Roberts on the relation between carbon emissions and Human Development Index. I think you are acquainted with these variables. I could just as well say energy here. So, for the year 1975, what you see is that's all countries of the world for which data exist at that time. And you see with a little bit of more carbon, you can have a lot more quality of life. But over there, with about the same quality of life, you can consume lots and lots of carbon. Look at this. This is 1980. This is 1985. 90, 95, 2000, 2005. All correlations in that area. What happens there? If we look at this, in the year 1975, we have needed almost 5 tons of carbon to have a high development in terms of HDI of 0.85. This is the sort of threshold to high development. In the year 2005, we needed only 1 ton of carbon to achieve an HDI of 0.85. So this is a reduction in this period by 2/3. Well, To quote a well-known contemporary, yes, we can. We can maintain a very good quality of life. We have learned to do that at a lower environmental cost. In these 30 years, we have improved our ways of dealing with that substantially. The trouble is, we can, but we don't. We move along this axis at the moment. And this is exactly the non-sustainable pathway we are on. So, that was part 2. And what I wanted to say is that the challenge for a European sustainability transition is quite a major change. It's not a minor thing. And it is in a context where, Europe functions for the world in all these curves in 2 ways. On the one hand, as one of the major resource consumers, and on the other hand, as an idol, as an area where everybody strives to achieve the same. So all developing countries march after Europe or the US, because this is the way to go. So our responsibility is not only for our own use of nature's resources, but also for the use of the rest of the world. Okay. Labor. What? You're getting tired, I see, if I observe your faces correctly. What is the role of labor in the societal relation with nature? I've now been talking about metabolism, which means, well, chewing materials and energy and digesting them and driving internal processes and then deleting it again. This is not only our only relation with the natural environment. The other very important relation with the natural environment is that we deliberately change natural systems so to make them more comfortable, more useful for us. This is what we call colonization here. So we put work, energy, materials, intelligence into the environment. We change it into colonized systems. For example, from a forest to a field. And then we gain the resources and services that we want. And the trouble is that usually the systems that we create are not in equilibrium, so we have to continuously, they try to reconvert, so we have to continuously invest energy and resources. And this changes our social systems. As you may imagine, when we're doing agriculture, our social organization is completely different, our work organization is completely different than if we gain our energy from, say, nuclear plants, where we have to invest an enormous time in security issues, but not in plowing the fields. So this makes a big difference for the social system. And labor can be understood in this process. This is to show you just a little bit the long, big thing on the amount of human labor. These are just very simple case studies showing for hunter-gatherers, for 2 more or less agricultural. This is Sweden agriculture, so that's a very simple subsistence culture. This is an already half industrialized agriculture. How much do people work? And what you see, household work is more or less constant, both per adult in a society and per inhabitant. But investment in the economy is rising. So we invest ever more labor into our environment. And the amounts here are about equivalent to what we have now in industrial countries. The same for Britain. So how did labor behave in view of the other transitions I have been showing you? What we see, and that's quite interesting, is that the number of labor hours between 1870 and 1990 in Britain, although population increased, did not change very much. Yeah? We have not become a big leisure society. Yeah? It's about the same. But at the same time, here we have a parallel movement more or less of labor increase and energy use increase, or material increase, and then energy takes off and labor stays stable. So labor and resource use, behaves very differently according to socio-ecological transitions or phases or stages. Here you see it in a little bit different way. So that's the energy intensity of labor. And there you see in the first phase of industrialization up to 1950, labor and energy and materials increase more or less in parallel. So we need ever more labor time in order to utilize all that energy, in order to utilize all these materials to transform them into commodities. This changes after the Second World War massively, where the labor and energy intensity of human time, use of human labor time, rises substantially, but the last phase after early 70s, you see the same break as I showed you in another figure. There it stabilizes. There is no clear relation anymore between labor and energy. So this is also good news, because we can say we do not have to use ever more energy and ever more materials in order to have a reasonable employment structure or a reasonable labor. Here you see just a little bit differently. First phase, energy and labor rises. Then energy substitutes for labor, so we reduce labor hours, and then no relation anymore. So we are in a situation in Europe where labor-energy use is not related. So if we have to save energy, if we have to, or we have a real resource trouble, this does not have clear implications for labor. Yeah. Biophysically, how does labor relate to nature? Oh yeah, that's a very funny, sorry, the sequence is weird. I'll show you that. So, you can start off with a person household system and say, well, this is a kind of machine for time, a time machine. Our demography creates human time, gives birth to children, remains us alive, takes care of the old so they live longer. So the person household system is a creation machine for human time. Here we have the natural environment outside. We invest the economic system, invests physical work on nature, because unless it does invest physical work, nature doesn't give a damn. You can't talk with nature. You have to physically impact it. And this delivers ecosystem services to society. Yeah, and you can say economic system is an intermediate creation machine for money. And in between a household system, you have an exchange of labor for money,